Welcome to the Edges of Lean. I'm Bella Engelbach, and in this podcast we explore the human and creative side of lean thinking, unusual places where lean thinking is practiced. We meet people who are practicing continuous improvement in many different flavors and styles. So come along with me on a journey to the edges of lean.
Episode 40, Continuous Improvement and Leading Change with Art Bierschbach. Art Bierschbach is the principal consultant with B10 Consulting, LLC. His personal mission every day is to add value. In the business world, he lives this out as a business coach and consultant in the areas of leadership, management, marketing, sales, operations, and finance. He is a certified John Maxwell speaker, coach, and trainer. A former Air Force pilot, John received his Lean Six Sigma Black Belt as an executive with Raytheon.
Art Bierschbach, welcome to the Edges of Lean.
Thank you, Bella.
All right, tell us about yourself. What are you doing today and how did you get to do it?
Okay. Well, kind of a long story, but obviously I'm an Air Force guy. So after the Air Force Academy, I was privileged to fly. I got to fly in the F-111s. And as an instructor, I would fly in the wing and teach pilots to be flight leads. Years later, I had the opportunity and I noticed that in the Lean and Six Sigma world, good projects had good team leads. Projects that struggled had bad team leads. So I was right back to my Air Force roots where I'm leading business leaders by following along with them and teaching them to be better business leaders. So hence the business wingman concept. That's what I want to do. So over a lot of years, I just found that every project, no matter what it was trying to get an improvement. If you want people to improve, they have to do something different. For them, that's a change. So every leader needs to be good at leading change.
Wow. So take me back to that time. You're sitting in an aircraft, which is flying how fast?
Hey, it varied. I mean, we would fly low levels at usually 8 miles a minute, sometimes 9 miles a minute, nautical miles a minute.
Okay.
One of the memories that's just a picture ingrained in my brain I'll never forget, and why I love doing it. We were coming off a target on the Nellis Ranges one time, and we decided we'd go out low level. So I looked over at my wingman as we're doing Mach 1.4 at about 100 feet, and I could see a shockwave rippling across the desert floor. And that's just one of those things that, God, I love that.
That's incredible. I can't even imagine that. Wow. Mm-hmm. Wow. So that was very fast, very low, right? And so, but you're not necessarily leading, you are training other leaders.
Absolutely. And, in the Air Force, you're always training future leaders. It's always one of the emphasis points. And that's true across the military. And if you think about why, just go back and look at a couple of Medal of Honor recipients. These are amazing people who did amazing things, but when they got out of bed that morning, most of them did not have the title of leader. These are people that stepped up. So that's why you always have to train leaders. In the business world, what's that mean? It means you don't want to have to be there every minute. You want your people, the people that you want to do the day-to-day work in your business, to be developed as leaders and know when they have to step up and take care of the customer or make a decision based on your vision as the owner and your values as the owner, as the C-level exec. One of the primary things a leader has to do, no matter who they are, I don't care if they're chief of staff of the Air Force, if they're owner of a mom and pop with 2 employees, you have to be sharing your vision and make sure people understand your values, because that's the way your organization has to run.
Right. So I'm going to ask you, this is going to kind of sound funny after talking about F-111s and flying across the desert. I have dogs,
So I spend quite a bit of time learning how to train the dogs so I can have a reasonable life with the dogs. One of the
Right.
one of the things that the dog training people say is train for the situation, not in the situation. And I was wondering, what do you think about that? Because what you're talking about is being in the situation, right? When you're running a business, wherever you are in the business, you're going to kind of be in the situation all the time. But
Right.
so how do you feel about that?
I hadn't heard it put that way, but I kind of like it. And as I'm trying to digest it here on the fly, I do think it applies because you're not going to have canned situations. Things will be different.
Right.
We're always fond of saying a plan never survives first contact with the enemy. So why should I bother planning? Because you got to have something to adapt from. So you do the planning and then you adapt based on the changes in the situation. We always know the situation will change. We never know how. So you have to be prepared and you have to be trained for situations that may come up, but you also have to be adaptable and flexible as the situation changes.
Right. Which is an interesting concept when you're thinking about lean, and you think about standard and using standard process, right? And it's one of the arguments I think that people have against a lean, not that we sort of want to do lean deployment, but about deploying that way of thinking and putting standards in place is that people are very afraid that if you put a standard in place, we know things are going to change.
Right.
Things are changing all the time. They're almost changing faster than we can keep up with them. And so we don't want to put a standard in place. But if we don't have that standard in place, we might not even see what the problem is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think lean, actually, I kind of like the lean example, because if you think about what lean is trying to accomplish, you're trying to provide a service or a product at the pull of the customer with a minimal amount of waste and minimal cost. The boss doesn't know it all. So I think that's a case where you need to understand the difference between a manager and a leader. Admittedly, a leader needs to have skills as a manager, but we reward managers, especially in middle management, for consistency, for producing the same thing, the same way, the same amount over and over and over. And they get locked into not wanting to take a risk because they know they succeed by that consistency. And we want leaders to break things and put them back together better. Leaders are focused on getting better results. That's the core of continuous improvement. So leaders really do need to be willing to take a risk, break the status quo, and put it back together better. And you can only do that if you're listening to your people, and if your people feel free to make a suggestion and take a risk. And you have to give them that freedom.
Right. And I think it's really important, especially for middle managers. I love that you talked about middle managers. And I often talk about how they're really stuck, right? A middle manager is, they've got to deliver that thing that their department or their group is supposed to deliver. They've got that, they're the level of management that's closest to where the work is actually happening.
Right.
And so they get a lot of things inflicted on them. So, from further above, sometimes it's unfunded mandates, and sometimes it's, what appears like a random change that doesn't make any sense to them.
Yeah.
So how do you, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say middle managers are really at the place where they have to understand the very basics of leading a group. And that's that there's really two things involved. They have to get results while they're building relationships. It's not an either or. You have to do both. And that balance can be tough to reach.
Yeah. So how do you advise as you're working with leaders that bring you into your organization, how do you advise them to engage with the levels below them?
Well, first and foremost, leaders have to value people. we have a dearth in the world, I think, but definitely here in America, of values-based, people-centered servant leaders. And we see that over and over and over. People have a title that doesn't make them a leader. It just means they have a title. So first, y'all, you have to value people. And there's some ways you do that, but mainly it's by the way you treat them. Okay, for me, it's the behaviors for success. For me, that's integrity, respectfulness, forgiveness, selflessness, humility, commitment, kindness, and patience. If you treat your people that way, you are showing them you value them.
So I got to tell you, and you know this, that those are not necessarily things that are taught in engineering school, business school, the places that people go to, to learn their art, to learn their craft. And so I think people come into the workplace needing all that stuff for themselves, but not necessarily knowing how to do that for others. So how might somebody start? They say if you're a continuous improvement consultant and you're working with, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Sure.
Right. Okay. You're working with a leader, right? And you see the leader come in and you persuade them that it's a great idea for them to go to the Gemba, to go to the actual place, see where the work is happening. And the first thing that leader does is say to somebody who's doing their job, why'd you do it that way? That's all wrong. That's not the way I would do it. You dope. What would you say to that leader?
That leader has actually a whole lot of learning to do.
Yeah.
I try and disengage them there as quickly as possible. And then to me, especially leading up, but leading in any situation is asking better questions, okay? I can walk in somewhere and I can give them Art's answer, and that's fine. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. Maybe they'll believe it, maybe they won't. But when I ask Bella the right questions that lead her to an understanding of what maybe would have worked better, now I've drawn Bella's answer out of Bella. You buy in. You own the answer. It's your answer, not mine. So to me, that's the essence between mentoring and coaching. Coaching is really asking better questions and finding those answers that are inside of somebody and drawing them out so they own that answer. And then they're going to do it. They'll be accountable to it. They'll be better leaders because of it. It may not be fast, but it certainly, I think, arrives at a better solution.
Yeah. So can you give us an example, something that you've seen, and not to embarrass anybody that you've worked with, of course?
Okay. Let me go back to one of the favorite projects I've had. And it's one of my favorites because it happened about 4 times faster than I would expect. But a client brought me over to Scotland because he swore he couldn't get any more product through his plant. And so he felt he needed a new building and wanted me to help lay out the product flow. And I got there, and the first thing I noticed is this guy was a ball of stress. I was afraid he was going to fall over of a heart attack any minute. His front office team was not really engaged. All the decisions went through him. They couldn't do anything until he approved it. And down on the shop floor, it was kind of full, but there was a lot of potential there. So after a couple hours, I pulled him aside and I just said, you don't need a new building. Here's what we need. And I talked about those things. We talked about how we can develop his team, how we can make them accountable for decisions that he had not released in the past, and let them go off and do it. And we did a little bit of lean on the shop floor. And to me, this is a 2-year project. 6 months later, though, I'm standing on the shop floor next to him. He is visibly more relaxed. I'd already seen his front office team was engaged and busy. He was so relaxed. He's a very religious guy in a religious community. And he was taking time off to drive the school bus to the local church school. I mean, he was living a much better life. He was much happier. The shop floor was about a third empty. Things were organized. They were moving, but nobody was running. There was no panic. And he leaned to me and goes, Art, our throughput is up 40%.
Wow.
I mean, still telling that story. That's why I do this. I helped his life. I mean, I really believe that. And that's why I do this. So what did that take? First of all, and this is true of a lot of businesses, you have to teach the C-level guys or the owner to let go and stop micromanaging. Tell your people what you want done, develop the skills in them to do it, and then get out of their way. Let them run with it. Kind of a long answer, but that's what I would do. That's what I would advise is get out of their way, but train them first.
So that, training for the situation. So the when they're in the situation, that's not as easy as it sounds. I mean, to say to somebody, particularly if it's their business, right? This is my business. I built it. Mm-hmm. To say to somebody, now you're going to step back, right? You're going to start to trust people. That's an incredibly difficult thing to ask people to do.
Yes,
because and the first thing that's going to happen is something is not going to go exactly right? So
every
single time, right? So that's going to be stressful as well. So what's the sort of the next piece of calming advice, of way of thinking for somebody in that situation?
I ask them what they want for their business long term. Do you want to work here forever? Do you want to hand it off to your kids? Do you want to be able to sell it? In any of those cases, what is the value worth if everything has to go through the owner? If everything has to go through the owner, nobody wants to buy that. If I succeed with a business owner when she can take her family to Hawaii for 2 weeks and leave her cell phone on the desk because she knows the business won't miss a beat. Now, there's a business that has value in the marketplace. Somebody's willing to buy that because that value continues even without the owner in the middle of it. And that's what I think you should build in any situation so your team can run and your team can be successful and they're not waiting for you to make a decision. Most owners can do anything in their business better than anybody else, but they can't do everything better than anybody else. They need to they need to develop their people, and they need to hand off to somebody anything that can be done 70% as well as the owner can. Let them start at 70% and build them up till they can do it as well as you. But the owner can't do everything. That puts a lid on the business. If your listeners are familiar with John Maxwell, he is the leadership author, and he is the best in the world at leadership right now, without question. And if you go back to his basics, the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership, the number one is your leadership level puts a lid on your business. You can only grow your business so much. You kind of reach a plateau based on your leadership level. And the only way to grow the business beyond that, do better beyond that, is to raise your leadership level so your business can grow
and move
to
up.
meet that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. So being a leader is a continuous improvement job in and of itself.
It's a journey. It never ends.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
People follow a leader because they get something from that leader. A leader always has to be able to give something. If the leader stops growing and has nothing left to give, people stop following. That is the limit. They go find somebody that will help them grow and continue to do better.
So one of the things that you and I talked about previously was about this concept of change. And we've talked about change as being, it's inevitable. It's happening really, really fast. Leaders have to be able to lead for change. And you talk about the importance of having that set of values, the internal set of values. How do people go about identifying their personal values? And how do they then start to translate that into how they relate to the people who are working for them or with them?
Yeah, there's a number of different tools you can start with. You have to start with personal values, like you mentioned. And there's a couple different ways to do that. I have a couple different exercises. I kind of like the one where list the 5 or 6 people you most admire in the world today, and then put down why. Why do you admire them? So there's a window into your values a little bit. I also have an exercise I use in groups where, forget the exact number, but there's about 200 different things that could be values. And I want you to highlight, maybe the top 20 at first, and then whittle it down to 10. And this is where it gets hard, is whittle it down to 3 to 5. Okay. And it gets really tough. And then for organizations, you kind of have a good feel for your personal values. Now I team people up in pairs, and I want you to agree on the top 10 between the two of you, and then switch to another partner. Each of you have your top 10 list, and I want you to agree on the top 5. And I try and go to the top 3. Sometimes that we don't get there, but that helps, I think, with both personal values and organization.
Yeah, and sometimes you actually have to sort of test them out, right, and see how do these fly in the real world, right? Are these really resonating with the rest of the organization, and are they linked to where we're going, where we expect to be going?
Yeah, once we get down to that, whatever the number winds up being, 3, 5, 7, I want you to take those and go live them and talk to your organization about them, and let's get back together in 60 days and tell me what you think. So at least we've had a little bit of gel time and a little, real world influence on it to see, how these gonna work. But the other part is, you can talk the talk, but you have to walk the walk. One of the best vision statements that included values I've ever read was with a company named Enron. So if you go back through your accounting books, you'll probably see how that worked out for them. They talked the talk, they did not walk the walk.
Right. So for those of you who are maybe a little younger, Enron was a financial services company that
actually they were an energy company.
An energy company.
The financial services were through Lehman, and they pulled Lehman down.
Right. That's right. That's right. A famous. A famous, really negative business situation, one that nobody wants to be in. No, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I saw an interesting exercise the other day in a completely different context. Speaking of living values, which was, to, as a result of an exercise, come up with something that you wanted to have happen in the next week, and then when people got back together a week later, to be prepared with a story of how you had lived that situation.
Oh, I like that. That's good.
So that gives people a chance to, all right, let's do it, right? Let's not just talk about it. But in the next week, I actually need to go and do this. If we've decided that a value is kindness, hopefully in a week you can find an opportunity to be kind to somebody.
I love that. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was a I definitely want to try that, make it a requirement.
Yeah.
So again, kind of going back to change. One of the things that I think that we have these ideas about change that that there are various change management approaches that we could use. And we talk about change management, we talk about change leadership, and they almost all include the component of making some people wrong. So you kind of divide people into, all right, you've got your early adopters, they're the people who will go along with you. You've got your group of people in the middle who are waiting to see what happens. And then you have this group of people who are resistors, right? Who are not going to change. They're going to hang on to the old way no matter what. And again, kind of to put you on the spot, what do you think about that as you're looking at people and respecting people and valuing people? Is that a good way to look at people when you're leading change?
I know it happens. I personally prefer not to look at it that way.
Uh-huh.
So what you described, I would say, is an organization that has not spent enough time planning and communicating before the change occurred. So it has to be crystal clear from the very top leadership that for a big change from the very top leadership, that the current situation is not acceptable. We cannot continue the way we're doing, getting the results we're getting. And then we have to develop a team that is going to communicate that. And the team has to be larger than what you expected. If I can grab something real quick to make sure I don't say it wrong. If you go back to John Cotter's book, Leading Change, he makes it very clear there is no checklist. But he says, very commonly, I see these steps in successful change. So the first is you have to create a sense of urgency among the relative people. That's that idea that our current results are not acceptable and we have to go do something different. Then you have to create a guiding team. And this is a fairly high-ranking team, and it's bigger than what most people expect. You get a lot more people involved. And within that team, you have to have a very clear, very simple, uplifting vision and a strategy to attain that vision. And then you have to communicate that vision and the strategy. But even more, you need to do it thoroughly and repeatedly. And I like to make sure this is a place where I think a communication plan is invaluable. So you're going to have kind of just general broadcast communications up front. Here's the situation. Here's why it's not acceptable. We need to do something. And then as you start to get more people involved, you start saying, hey, I think this might work. And we want some input from you. What, you think this would help us get a better result than what we're getting now? So you're trying to involve as many people as you can. Give them a voice, make sure they know they're being heard. And then when you get the team that's really going to plan and execute the change, you have to empower the stakeholders. The only role of the leader then is to remove obstacles. The team should own it. The team should be running with it right now. And then you got to get that first short-term win, that right up front short-term win, and then publicize it, communicate it. Make sure everybody knows. At some point, a leader has to be a little bit of a cheerleader too. After that short-term win, that's the time for the rah-rah speech. That's the time when you tell them how good you're doing. See, I knew you could do it. And then you build momentum. You let up. You build on those short-term changes, and you keep doing this until you have a brand new culture and you make the change stick. The other thing I want to make sure of, or I try to do, I have been most successful in implementing changes when I changed the environment so they physically could not go back to the old way. So we had a program when I was with Raytheon where we made some improvements to the repair process on the M1 thermal imaging system. We were one of the depots repairing it, and we just were taking too long. The Army just didn't want to wait that long to get their parts back. Rightfully so. So we changed the process, but as we changed the process, we put all of the workstations in a new room, in a new area that was not compatible with the old way of doing it. So we changed both the process and the environment. So those kind of naysayers that wanted to stick with the old way physically couldn't. They didn't have the facility to go back to the old way. So I think all these things together are important to have a successful change. And we achieved so much in terms of our lead time. The next year, we actually had a big contract increase, and more of the work came to us than the other depot. So,
well, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. And I think that is very important. I really like what you said about changing the environment, and that could be the cultural environment or it could be the physical environment, right?
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely true.
So whatever it is, but I think at the heart of it, right, is that it has to be in the end an actually good change. I think when people talk about that a particular change failed, I don't know, they always examine, was this a good change to start out with, right? That's the thing that that is the biggest killer of change.
Well,
because people aren't going to go along with something that obviously has major flaws.
Oh, absolutely. And the people see it. What a lot of change project leaders don't do a good enough job at is speaking in the language of the owner or the leadership. Their language is dollars, clear and simple. So make sure you can explain, here's what our current situation is costing us. After the change, well, here's what we invest to do the change. After the change, here's the return you're going to have. You have to make it crystal clear in dollars, or they're probably not on board.
Yeah. Their minds will drift off somewhere else, and so will their attention.
That is absolutely true.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. If you could change one thing I'll only talk about the U.S. right now. If you're going to change one thing in U.S. business right now, what would you do? Give you Art's magic wand. What would you change?
I have to go back to we need more values-based, people-centered servant leaders. Bella, I've never once had a business, and I'm kind of paraphrasing Mark Cole. He's the CEO of all the John Maxwell Enterprise. On the phone, Mark is very fond of saying as he's talking to us, and by the way, I'm part of the John Maxwell team, so I do get to get a lot of advice and ask questions of Mark, and it's a wonderful opportunity. But Mark is fond of saying, we've never had a single company come to us and go, Art, I got a big problem. I have too many really great leaders. That's never happened. So we just need more of those leaders who care about people and care about results and get great results at the same time.
Yeah, right. So where are they going to come from?
We make them.
We make them.
Okay. My goal, very much like John Maxwell's, is I want to influence leaders I never meet. So I want to go out there and teach business owners to be great leaders and develop more leaders in other places, people I never meet. So that's my legacy I want to leave is I want people to be out there understanding the way to move forward is to create more leaders.
So it's kind of like if you're raising your kids right, so they'll raise your grandkids right.
Very much. And I use a lot of examples with kids, not because I think employees are children. I think children are people too. And if we treat them well like adults, they'll make better decisions. They won't be perfect. They'll make mistakes. They'll make bad decisions, but we all do that. So we have to learn and move forward. In fact, it's in our failures that I think we learn the most. We are not always good about evaluating our successes and understanding why. We go to great lengths to understand our failures. And, I had a commander in Europe that he really taught me that. We had an inspection and it was 4.5 days, real long days, and we got an outstanding. It's the highest mark you can get. Afterward, the commander pulls the evaluation team in and we're talking through all the things that happened. And we're several hours into this. And finally, one of the guys goes, "Hey, boss, wait. You do know we did well. We didn't fail, right? So why are we going through all this?" And it was almost like he got right in my face and everybody else's face in that room and said, "Because I don't ever want you to succeed by accident. I want you to know why and be able to repeat it." And that just stuck with me. He made a real impression there.
I love that. And that is so much in line with what I teach people about actually creativity. You've got to start by looking at what's good, because first of all, that actually helps you think more clearly. It engages the thinking creative part of your brain. But secondly, as you're saying, if you understood why that went well, then you can build that into whatever it is that you're going to do next. But I love that. Yeah. You don't want to be succeed by accident. We get lucky sometimes, but if you know what went well, then let's make that part of our standard, part of the way we move forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's so much more positive than conducting a post-mortem. That was something that when I was working for the big company, people wanted to do post-mortems, and I said I wasn't really into, doing post-mortems, but I was very happy to look at lessons learned, and lessons learned can be things that are both positive and negative.
Right. So. Well, and that's one lesson I carry forward out of the fighter squadron that I think really helps me. We would have, I'd have a flight that was, say, 2.5 hours. And so by the time we did our pre-flight and planning and everything had to be done, by the time we get back to the squadron, we could be at easily 8 or 10 hours of the day. And I've had debriefs where we take everybody in the flight, lock ourselves in a room, rank is left outside. And if my boss is part of the flight and he made a mistake, we're going to talk about it. We're going to point it out. I'll do it respectfully, just like with anybody else. But if I skip over a mistake the boss made, there is no doubt in my mind after that debrief, I would no longer have been an instructor. He expected me to go over everything that happened, everything that went well, everything that didn't. I've had 2.5-hour flights go 5 hours into the debrief. So we go over everything in great detail because we're spending hundreds of thousands of your tax dollars each flight, and we owe it to you to get the most out of each one.
And to keep everybody alive and keep the equipment in good shape. Yeah. As well. Right. Yeah. So you're really delivering. So, so you're talking about a very interesting cycle there, which is you're going to plan. And then, as you said, when the plan will not necessarily suffice once you get up in the air, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be weather. Absolutely. There's going to be traffic. There's going to be the birds. Who the heck knows what happens, right? Right. Yeah. So it happens, and then you come back, and you're actually spending, in this case, more time looking at what happened and learning from it than you did actually doing it. And that is not something that we see in business very much, right?
No, right. And I'm not sure how far I would take that, but I do think we need to do a better job evaluating our own performance after things happen, because that's where the learning occurs. People go out and say experience is the best teacher. Don't believe that for a second. It's evaluated experience is the best teacher. It's when you go over it and figure out what happened is where the learning occurs.
That is a great quote right there. Evaluated experience is the best teacher. Mm-hmm. All right, you have been around a few blocks. You've been around the planet a few times, I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. If you think about a young person starting out in their career, what would be the thing that you would say to them if you have that 5 minutes with them? What would you say to them?
Find a great mentor. Okay, when you first get commissioned, one of the first things you're told, and not enough of us did it, is go find some crusty old sergeant and follow him around for a couple years. Figure out what works and what you can learn there. And they'll give you great lessons. They'll give you lessons in leadership. They'll give you lessons about life. But, don't just assume that the brand new, second lieutenant, we call them butter bars. They got the kind of gold single bar is their rank. And, they are just fresh out of college, but it's those sergeants that have been out there for years making things actually happen that can teach you about leadership. So find a good mentor.
And that's really interesting that you're saying, look for a mentor who may not be, in your case, it may be enlisted versus rank, right? So you're going to, Yeah. And you know what strikes me about that, Art, is we're coming up on the time of year when in healthcare, people are going to be graduating from school and studying on their careers. And I know it's, constant complaint that the new docs, don't know what they're doing. Of course, we all hope that they learn quickly. But, there are going to be people out there who can help you out. You just need to ask them, right? Or you need to,
absolutely.
You need to let them know that you need help.
Yeah. One of the local hospitals here, I was talking for a while with the chief medical officer, and he told me, Art, I got some of the best trained people in the world, technically. Technically, I got some surgeons that know their specialty, just absolutely down cold, everything there is to know about it. But through all their training, they maybe only got 10 minutes of bedside manner. And nobody told them anything about leading people. And now I have this highly technically trained people. I need to lead a team to do a project, and nobody's ever talked to them about how to do that. So they need to get out there and find these people. I think one of the best things that can happen to a doc is latch on to one of these nurses that have been around for 20 years and have seen it all, and put the ego away for a minute and go up to them and ask them to teach you things, ask them, follow them around, see what they do, see how things happen. And that's part of the humility. I read that list of behaviors for success. Humility is one of them. To me, humility is being open to learning, being willing to listen. Or, as I sometimes more crudely put it, everybody in the world knows something I don't know. And if I'm a first-class a-hole, they're not going to teach me.
Right. You can't take anything in that way.
Yep. You have to be open, especially leadership. A lot of life is a growth journey. It's not a destination we achieve. You're always growing. You have to be open to learning.
And so what you're saying is young folks find that mentor, middle-aged folks find that mentor, old folks find that mentor too. There's always somebody to learn from.
One of the guys I talk with regularly, a couple of them, one's in their 20s. But, a couple of years ago, his business cleared near 800 grand. So obviously he knows something I don't know.
So you want to learn something from it.
Absolutely.
That's great. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much. I've had a great time with this conversation. I love, for those of you who are watching as opposed to listening, if you're listening, what you're seeing behind Art as some fighter jets. What kind are they?
They're two F-111s. I can't promise you I'm in one of them. A friend of mine took that picture, and we're not sure who was flying that day, but if it's not me, it's guys I flew with on other days.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So tell us about your company.
Yeah, B10 Consulting. B10 because Bierschbach has 11 letters. So my flying nickname is B10. Nobody's going to say Bierschbach. That's way too much. So B10. And I give business owners their lives back. I look for those businesses like that one in Scotland where the owner is buried in today, buried in today's deliveries, today's orders, today's emails, today's phone calls, today's vendor issues. And she lays in bed at night going, oh, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. Let's develop her team, teach them how to do the day-to-day stuff, teach the owner how to let go, and pay attention to what owners ought to be paying attention to. Values, vision, mission, strategy, goals, maybe a couple key customers. But that's where the owner makes the business better, and those doing the day-to-day work take care of the business.
Right. That's great. And that applies to any kind of business.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for traveling with me to the edges of lean.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it. It was a great conversation. I hope it helps somebody.
This is Bella Engelbach, and I'd like to thank Art Bierschbach for being my guest on the Edges of Lean. How are you leading change in the places you work? We love to hear from you. Find Art at yourbusinesswingman.com or on LinkedIn and start a conversation. Find me at leanforhumans.com or on LinkedIn, or comment wherever you watch or listen, and tell a friend about the edges of lean. Please join me in exploring more of the edges of lean. There's a lot to learn, and check out my friends in the Lean Communicators community at leancommunicators.com. You'll find more podcasts and videos with lots of great new content every week. The Edges of Lean is written and produced by Bella Engelbach with support from Podcast Inc. This is a Lean for Humans production.